And also just say a heartfelt thank you to all of you for coming out. We're trying to figure out something new. As you know, if you've been in our newsroom before, this is our newsroom, this space that we're sitting in. And typically we've held think-ins. They've been quite sort of casual and chaotic. We hope to take a little of that spirit, but bring something that is more of a considered look at one big question, one big subject. And that's why we're trying to see how these Tortoise Lates work. So we'd really love to hear from you when we're done, what you make of them. The idea is to take, if you like, one idea, one question, and run through the night and try and get a look at it from a whole different range of angles. So last week we did history, and tonight, as you've heard, we're doing power and the press. Phil spoke about speeches, Sam spoke about interviews, but Alastair, if you don't mind, we're just going to do the one question. Mm-hmm. What is the relationship between the power and the press? Perhaps a little like a news night, we're going to just keep on asking the same question again and again and again and see where we get to. Everyone here knows who Alastair Campbell is. I just want to explain who I am. I'm the guy who didn't sign the Beatles. So as you may know, Tortoise is trying to make its name in podcasting. And as you may also have heard, Alastair Campbell has started a podcast. So can you tell us, and I'm just going to quietly sit here and grind my teeth, Alastair, how did The Rest is Politics happen?
It happened with a phone call from a guy called Tony Blair, who I know because he is almost as fanatical about Burnley Football Club as I am. And he works for a gentleman that most of you will have heard of called Gary Lineker. Mm-hmm. And Gary Lineker runs Goalhanger Productions. Get it? Goalhanger. Mm-hmm. So they phoned up and said, you mentioned history, you've done history. They do The Rest is History. And they said they wanted to do a podcast, The Rest is Politics, and they thought the best thing would be me with a Tory. And I said, well, I don't like Tories. So the idea of sitting down and doing a podcast with them, yeah, but that's how it's going to work. So anyway, their idea was that I should do it with Dominic Cummings. Which I thought was interesting. I thought, however, that would probably make one good podcast.
Oh, a really good one.
It would be good, yeah. So I did speak to him and said, what do you think? And he said, no, I'm too busy trying to destroy Boris Johnson. So that was fine. I supported him in that. Carry on. I totally supported him with that endeavour. So then I wasn't quite sure whether to do it anyway. And then I actually did I went on social media. I did an Instagram live. And I said, if I were to do a podcast with a Tory, who do you think it should be? And it was just really interesting. About 40% said Rory Stewart, which is quite a lot.
Who were the others?
There were loads who were like, William Hay, Ken Clark, Danny Finkelstein, Ian Dale, lots of different kind of names. But Rory Stewart's name was way ahead. So I phoned him up and we started next week. We've only met twice.
So all of them have been down the line over Zoom?
Yeah. Which actually, in a funny sort of way, I don't think is detracted. The sound quality is really good,
yes,
which has nothing to do with me. And because we can see each other, we don't talk over each other. We very rarely talk over each other. The only time we did was when we had quite a bad, violent disagreement about Northern Ireland. I was really, really angry. And Rory was a bit shocked, I think, by how angry I can get. But we don't talk over each other. And so the thing I've learned about podcasting, the sound is absolutely vital. If the sound is off, you're going to lose people very, very quickly. And the other thing I really enjoy about it is the data. You must see this. The data we get. I've become obsessed about checking whether those 7 people who listened in Aruba last week, whether they came back and whether they're going up or down.
Well, the 7 people in Aruba are probably Rory, because he always seems to be in a place.
Yeah, he travels a lot. He does travel a lot.
Yeah.
I think it's a bit like this whole thing that you're doing. I think there's a desire for something sort of deeper than the stuff that most of the media gives you.
So let's aim for there. Let's try at the end of this to come back to the question of what's happened to the media and what we can do about it. But let's try and just go after this question of the relationship between the power and the press. And I wondered, Alastair, whether or not we could...
When you say power, do you mean political power?
Political power.
Okay.
So the way I was thinking of doing it was to say, look, let's try and understand how power itself views the press. Kat Neelan, who's here actually, has just joined us and is now our political editor. And we're having a really interesting time in that we got barred from Conservative Party conference. We weren't. We'll come back to this in a minute and I'll explain it to everyone. But I think there's something interesting about understanding how, when you're in power, how you see the press. Is it a vehicle? Is it an enemy? Is it a foghorn? How do you see it? And so I just wondered whether we could go through, just thinking through a few of the administrations of our kind of modern times. So let's start with Tony Blair. When Blair was in opposition, when you joined him, how did you and he see Fleet Street? What was the purpose of the press as far as you were concerned in terms of getting to power?
I'd say I think broadly we saw them as an obstacle. If you talk about the press, and the reason for that is because, I mean, remember when I was a journalist, particularly on the Mirror, a lot of my thinking about the press was born of having covered Michael Foot and, in particular, Neil Kinnock, who Neil, I think, is a great guy who had a lot to offer, and the press ripped him apart. Now, that wasn't the only reason he lost. There are lots of reasons why campaigns are won and lost, but it's sure as hell a lot harder when you have a biased, tendentious... In fact, there's something I need to do before we carry on. I don't actually allow this rag in my house. So I don't see why I should have it anywhere near me when I'm talking to you. So I saw that, and that was not a lot better.
Hang on, wait a second. You're going to love it when we get to this.
The Telegraph was quite good today. I saw... What's that?
Mirror, and we've got the Express. We'll cover this. These exciting props. They're exciting props for later.
Right. Okay. So we saw it. I saw it in particular as I never imagined we would, as it were, get the press on side. And for me, it was never about will they come out for us, will they endorse us. I don't think that stuff matters nearly as much as journalists think it does. Where I saw the press as being significant as an obstacle was in the extent to which they can frame the terms in which the debate is taking place. So, as you know, sometimes I got into arguments with the BBC, and my argument with the BBC was never the view that the BBC was biased, or that it wasn't sort of fulfilling its remit as a public service broadcaster. My argument with the BBC was the extent to which, and I think this still happens, the extent to which it allows the framing of the debate to be set, not by the public, not by the politicians, but by the press, which is biased. We have a very biased print media. So that's how I saw them. I think Tony saw them as, similar, but Tony was much more relaxed about... So, for example, as you know, famously we went to Australia, to the Hayman Island, to Murdoch's editors, and very unpopular decision within the Labour Party. But that was both of us saying, we are going to go and try and neutralise these people. Up until about 2000, we did, pretty good job in neutralising the Mail. They were still vile and they were still biased and what have you, but nothing like what they were before or what they've become since.
And just for a moment, explain to people the Hayman Island trip, because I think it's really interesting. The perception is that it worked. That actually a certain proximity to the Murdoch press worked for Tony Blair and for the Labour Party. Do you think that's right?
It depends what you mean by worked. I mean, look...
In your frame, neutralised it.
Yeah, I think, but not necessarily just because of that visit. See, I always say about people say, the Sun came out for Labour and that was a big thing. The Sun came out for Labour because they worked out we were going to win. They knew we were going to win. And Murdoch doesn't like being on the side of the loser. Now, the Hayman, to those who, probably some of you won't have been born then, but the Hayman Island, we were invited by Murdoch to go to a conference in the Hayman Island where all of his editors were there, from all of his empire around the world. And it was controversial. I remember Bruce Grocott, who was Tony's PPS, he was begging us not to do it. And Neil Kinnock, you read my diaries, Neil Kinnock, we almost came to blows over it. And I remember Neil saying, this guy put a fucking light bulb inside my head. He was really getting enraged about it. Or was Neil inside the light bulb? I can't remember. And so that was quite... But the reason we did that, it wasn't just we were saying proximity, etc. We were capitalising on the fact that they were obviously seeing us in a different light. And that meant they recognised that the public was seeing us in a different light. So almost more important than the fact of going was then the message that we gave when we got there. And actually, if you go back and read the speech that Tony made in Hame Light, it was quite a big speech. It was one of the, the building blocks of the entire strategy. And then, I guess, look, I'll be honest, I think at times we got too close. I think at times the mixing. I speak French and German. I know a lot of French and German journalists who live in London. They just can't fathom the way that the sort of political media nexus works here.
Well, let's come back.
And I think at times we got too close.
Let's come back to that in a sec, because I think that's still a question. But I'm really interested by your response when I asked you, how did you and Tony Blair see the press? You said an obstacle, and if we were framing this flatteringly, we would say, look, you are one of the people who's masterminded or made modern political communication. And many people would say, yes, you created spin. Mm-hmm. And I just wondered whether or not, A, you think that's true, you did create spin, and B, whether or not you did that because you were trying to navigate an obstacle.
No, I don't accept either of those things. And I'll tell you the thing about spin. To this day, I don't really know what it means, to be honest. I think that it became a catch-all for everything that we did. And I think partly it was driven by the failure of the Conservatives, not just the media, but the Conservatives. They couldn't work out the best way to attack Tony Blair. That's the truth. And they alighted, and the media got very frustrated, I think. I remember Dacre once saying to me, Paul Dacre, he said to me, we have to be the opposition because the opposition's so useless. I said, okay, well, go and stand for fucking Parliament then. But that was their view.
But that was your justification for a kind of communication that was always making a case.
Well, I think in modern politics, I think in modern anything, you have to make a case.
About everything all of the time.
Well, we live now, whether we like it or not, we live in a permanent conversation. And you have to be part of that conversation. If you're in politics and you're allowing other people to set the terms of your conversation with the public, you're not going to win.
But then, Alastair, you see why people think that makes you party to the endless polarisation of everything, the politicisation of everything, and the removal of government as an authority, a place that invites you to understand things, that explains things.
I think we were doing all of that, but not getting covered as a government that was doing that because the media became obsessed with the whole presentational side. To me, honestly, I was Tony's spokesman and director of communications, what have you. I reckon 20% of my time was about the press.
Talking about the relationship. It was us talking about each other.
Yeah, it was about 80% was about strategy. It was about what are we trying to do, how are we trying to do it, and how are we getting through to the public. I didn't give a shit about the press. I only cared about how we got a message to the public. Now, particularly in opposition, a lot of that is what you're doing through the media. You have to do that. And so this thing about spin, I think, became, I got built up as this kind of big figure, me and Peter Mandelson. And again, that was part of the Tories attack. Tony Blair doesn't stand for anything. He's got to be held up by these evil people. The devilised post and all that stuff. They couldn't work him out. And to this day, if you had Michael Howard up here now, he will tell you to his dying day that he was defeated by, they had cleverer, nastier, more evil people than we had. You can't get the fact that actually we had a political project led by somebody who knows how to lead. That's what's the problem with this lot today. They don't have any of that. And they think they've learnt all the wrong lessons as well. Johnson learned all the wrong lessons. Cameron actually learned a lot of the wrong lessons. It's about the strategy that you're trying to take forward. And why I say it's an obstacle is because, and this is what social media is quite interesting in this, because of course it's now easier to get your own message through there. But when you're at the top level politics, you've got it all. You can't just get your own message out. I mean, the guy I'm afraid who did get his own message out there, but he had Murdoch helping him, was Trump. And I know the American, you talk about polarization, that's a even more polarized media debate than we have.
But let's go, let's take what you said and then try and understand what happened between Boris Johnson and the press, or Boris Johnson and the media. So if for Blair it was an obstacle, how do you think Boris Johnson viewed and perhaps used the press?
Boris Johnson used the fact that he never stopped being a journalist. That's why he should never have been Prime Minister. They were part of his team. What happened, I mean, not all of them. Listen, don't let me, I don't like it when I get portrayed as constantly attacking journalism, because I think we need good journalism more than ever. I really do. And I think that the Murdochization, Dacre, the Express, the kind of that poisonous, polarizing right-wing bias, I think has had a really detrimental impact upon the entirety of our political culture. And good journalists, I think, and by good, by the way, I don't just mean people who think I think. I mean people who really care about getting their facts right. I mean people who really, I think all this kind of stuff is really important. I think what Matt's done at the New European is important. I think the Byline Times and these guys, I think that, the podcast revolution, I think, is fascinating and it's part of journalism. But I think that Johnson, basically, and Michael Gove, actually, they were journalists for whom the political game and the story is what really drove them. And so I think Johnson was just blessed with the fact that he had such good relations with so many people in the media who basically saw him as a friend.
And that's what I guess I want to stop pretending to be sort of somehow kind of impartial in this, or at one remove, because I'm obviously not, Alastair. But I look at this, and that's what I wonder about Boris Johnson. I want to understand what you think about the relationship between his time in power and the press. Because there was something fundamentally different about having a prime minister for whom it was Rebecca and Paul and Charles and Tony and all of the people who were running large, certainly newspapers, were, I don't know what the right word is, but friends, professional friends.
They're players as well as spectators.
And
they're playing on his team.
And I wonder whether you think that was something that was particularly unusual in having a journalist prime minister, or whether that was institutionally baked in the relationship between Fleet Street and Downing Street.
It definitely changed, I think. It accelerated from the time. So, for example, when Margaret Thatcher was prime minister, I hope you haven't ever accepted an honour, James. I don't think journalists should ever accept honours. Okay, Thatcher doled out peerages. She had a pecking order. Peerages for the owners, knighthoods for the editors, and the occasional CBE or OBE for a columnist that says we're great. That was the way they thought about it. Now, to me, that is a form of corruption, right? And I think with Johnson, look at who's Johnson going to put in his resignation honours. The other guy should even be allowed resignation honours, is beyond the pale anyway. But Dacre and Nadine Dorries. I mean, if this was Botswana, we'd be sort of getting on to Transparency International and saying, "What do you think?" So
I think increasingly people from Botswana would say that's an unfair
comparison.
I
get that. It's like the guy in Private Eye, the Papua New Guinea correspondent. I mean, he's got it. No, so I think that, and so to have, this is why I get so kind of. One of the lies they used to run against us, including Johnson, when Johnson was editing The Spectator and writing The Telegraph, one of the lines they used to run at us relentlessly is we had the whole of the press under our thumb.
The New Labour.
New Labour, yeah. Now, we had a better playing field than Neil Kinnock did, for sure. But the idea that we weren't having to, keep fighting these fuckers to get a fair hearing, we were. Whereas, Johnson literally... I mean, I'll tell you something that I think sums up this change. The fact that Johnson, as a journalist, was sacked by a paper, your old paper, that then endorsed him as Prime Minister.
Yeah.
What does that say about the decline of standards in both our media and our politics?
And what did you read into the delay, I think of it as a delay, but the very long time between the breaking of the party story and the condemnation in the Mail, Telegraph, Times? What explains that?
A form of intellectual corruption.
It's intellectual, it's not personal. You think that there was a buying into the bigger project. So it wasn't about personal relationships. It was
Well,
about...
it was partly that. It was basically having, as Prime Minister, somebody who was able to pick up a phone and say, go easy and don't do this and do that, and this is the line. I mean, look at the Express today. We've now had 4 Conservative Prime Ministers, and they're really happy because Truss is exactly the same length as Boris. So every day, we've got the economy's about to boom, Brexit's about to be great, stay with me, I've got your back. It's day after day. So it's not journalism. They've gone about spin. These are the real spin doctors.
And one, I was going to come to that in a minute, but I'll come to that in a minute because I want to just go through the administrations. Okay. Let's do Blair, we've done Johnson, let's do Truss, right? And I want to, before we get
Truss
to this
and the media.
Truss and the media. And in particular, I just want to pause because, a lot of people are asking themselves, how did we get here? Right? My mum said to me the other day, I can't understand it. How did we get here? And one of the things that I don't understand in terms of how we got here is how in July and tipping into August, the papers turned on certain people who looked like they could mount a campaign against Liz Truss.
And then Sunak.
Penny Mordaunt and Rishi Sunak, but in particular Penny Mordaunt. Mm-hmm. I didn't understand why suddenly there was a turn, particularly in the Mail and the Telegraph. And maybe I read too much into it, but you could tell from the headlines and the pictures that they were taking a view that this was not the person that they wanted to see win the race. What was going on there?
I honestly don't know. You may be unsurprised to know that I don't really talk to them very often. So I don't know. I think that they'd made the decision that she was the one, that Truss was the one, more likely to carry on with an agenda that they bought into. Now, that's political, okay? And newspapers are entitled to have political views. But I think what I object to is when they are players, as they are in a context like that, without any sort of declaration of being players. They're pretending to be these kind of just, we just cover the facts and then we might sort of slip our opinions in on editorial pages. So I think with Truss and that leadership debate, and I'll tell you what I think has been quite interesting. I mean, I think she is out of depth. I think he was the worst Prime Minister we've ever had because of all the moral failings that we know about and because he doesn't really care about people or policy or anything, frankly, apart from himself. And now we've got Liz Truss, who's, in fact, I'll just tell you why. Roy and I have recorded a special podcast today about this.
This is, by the way, just to let you in, I'm endlessly talking to Alastair about the fact that Kate's saying, you really must listen to The Rest is Politics. It's really the best podcast out there. So Rory and Alastair are now recording them largely for Kate, and the other 600,000 people are listening. Yeah. So,
but what I think, so Truss, who's she's become an ideologue, and they quite like that. The press, we do have, the right-wing press is very right-wing. They like these kind of very strong, clear positions. But I think that what was going on there was, I said right from the word go, I didn't think Sunak would ever win because I think there was a lot of racism around the place. And I think they recognise that and know that in the Tory party membership. They always like to back winners, don't forget. They like to create, they might think they like to create winners, but they like to back winners. But I'll tell you what's been interesting in the last few days. You see, the Tory party has clearly learnt nothing about why Johnson's failed and why he's imploded, because she has just carried on doing a lot of the same stuff, a lot of gaslighting, a lot of sloganising, no real thought through kind of policy work. It's the same stuff, right? And thinking it's all about getting good press, as opposed to actually persuading the public you've got a real plan for the country, which you're not going to change every 5 minutes. And so I think, but what I've been interested in is, for example, listening to some of the broadcasters in the last couple of weeks. I think they have learnt a little bit about how badly they covered Johnson. Because I'll tell you something about Johnson that I find unforgivable for virtually all of the press. It's not just, the right-wing press, but the left-wing press as well. They so bought into the idea that he had become the Prime Minister. But how long was it before the lies were even recognised?
And reported.
They were just, we would see that guy, Peter Stefanovic, who was calling out lies on a daily basis and building up a following because that was all he was doing. But I remember when I was presenting Good Morning Britain, I got him on and he said, I can't believe we did that. It's the first time I've been on television. Now, that was months after pointing out systematic lying at the dispatch box of the House of Commons, which used to be a resigning offence. So I think the press moved under Johnson, and parts of them are still there with Truss, into a position where they were no longer actually even pretending to do journalism.
So, Alastair, I wanted to, by the way, forgive me, because I've always wanted to walk off in the middle of an interview.
Yeah.
And it would be particularly moody and crap to do it when I'm actually doing the interview. but I just want to go and get my prop. So 1 second.
I thought it was because you were...
No, I just want to get this.
Oh, you see.
Yeah. I want to talk about this.
Right, okay.
Because I want to understand what's happening here.
Don't ask me to understand them, because I...
No. I want to understand
I can tell you what's
happening. So if you look at this...
Right, yesterday they said get a grip, didn't they?
Yes, and so now it's defiantly Truss.
Right, and look at the top.
Oh, yeah, I know
the
that.
ruinous clutches of Starmer. Here's another one.
I just want to just have a look. Just go with this. Truss. What's happening here, right, is the Mirror doesn't do it, right?
Yeah. Interesting.
I guess what I'm really asking is,
Interesting.
Does any of this stuff matter anymore?
It doesn't matter as much as it did, but it matters for the reason I gave at the start. It matters for it matters for the role that they continue to play in the framing of the debate.
But really, okay, let's talk
I think
about
that does matter. I think that does matter, yeah.
But don't you do as much on The Rest is Politics or Twitter? Isn't it the case now that we're misunderstanding that old people and MPs and the Prime Minister's strategists have fundamentally misread the media? They're still in the clutches of the front pages.
That I totally get. Look, this may surprise you, right? We don't get any newspapers at home. I don't read newspapers. Fiona reads The Guardian and the FT online. She sort of tells me over the kitchen table what's in them. I listen to music. It's far better for your mental health, by the way, if you listen to music in the morning.
By the way, what's in them is that Martin Wolf has now moved to the left of you. He's more furious.
But so, I mean, I kind of know what's going on and I keep informed, but I agree with you about that. But the fact of the terms of the debate are still set. So if you take something like, if you get to say the TV debates in an election, okay? They do matter. A lot of people who don't normally connect with politics think, I should watch that. And they'll watch it. And honestly, that might be their main point of contact with that election. Not people like us who, most of the people in this room probably already know what they're going to vote in the next election, right? Probably think about it quite a lot. Who are you going for in an election campaign? You're going for the ones who haven't decided that. And so when you get to a TV debate, the framing of that is incredibly important. And my argument is it gets framed as much by that.
By the follow-up the next day in the papers?
No. By how they set the debate over time.
Oh, I see.
So, like, if you take the Tory party leadership election, right? And this is where I go back to big strategic defining moments. I would argue that the previous leader of the Conservative Party, who was most significant and most influential in that leadership election, was Margaret Thatcher. Right? Why? Because ever since she's been Prime Minister, the debate about tax has been defined as low tax good, high tax bad. Not just on the right either, right across the piece. So that's what I mean by the framing of it. So yes, in terms of, look, I don't know how we get a lot of data on the people who listen to the podcast, but I'm guessing most of them will be wanting to be politically informed, probably left-leaning, but we do get a lot of Tories as well, but they're mainly Tories who are getting fed up with the Tory party. So, but they're not the people
who are going to make a difference in this.
They might make a difference, but the people that you've really got to go for are the ones who are less than decided.
The reason I ask this is I genuinely am confused about who steers, who influences politics now. When I started editing The Times, William Rees-Mogg, who of course father of Jacob Rees-Mogg, but had been a grandee editor of The Times, said in a way that I hadn't really appreciated, and he was completely right. He said, the Times will have no bearing on the outcome of an election. The tabloids can have a bearing on the outcome of the election. The Times can have a bearing on policy. And that was the divide, i.e. in the run-up to an election, it's the tabloids, in the months and years afterwards.
No, I think he's both right and wrong about that. I think the Times, maybe less so now, because the field has become much more disparate, but I think the Times would have a big say in the extent to which the papers that are read by the many, not the few as it were, the tabloids, were framing their debate.
Oh, I see.
I wouldn't underestimate that. But
it's a sort of cascade of approval, in effect.
Yeah, but here's the other thing I would say, is that we talk, one of my big criticisms about journalists is that they're always talking about journalism, okay? And journalists talking to journalists about journalism is what journalists love doing, right?
Welcome.
Okay.
Settle in, we're going to be here for a while.
Okay. Which overlooks the fact, and it is a fact that it still remains the case in my view. This may be me slightly wishful thinking, that the world is still open to politicians who come along and seize an agenda and change the world for the better. But I wouldn't underestimate the ability, the extent to which a politician and a political party can come along and with a clear strategy can dominate the agenda. Now, that's what we set out to do, and I think we did it.
So let me ask you about Keir
Macron
Starmer.
did it in France.
Let me ask you about Keir Starmer, right? And not about who he is and what you think of him, but given where we are, given what we've seen in the last 3 weeks, given the conferences that have just happened, Keir calls you and says, Alastair, in 3 minutes, set it out for me. How do I handle the press? How do I communicate with the public between now and election day?
Start on election day by asking yourself and then answering the question, what do you want to be in the head of somebody who today, 2 years from the election, wherever it's going to be, is unsure? Those people that you're going to have to win over, what do you want them to have in their heads? And I would argue what you want them to have in their heads is this very simple concept. The Tories have got to go. That's why they've got to keep attacking the Tories for being what they are, useless, incompetent, wasteful crooks and charlatans. But you've also then got to have that person saying, and that's the alternative, okay? And then what the alternative has to consist of is that's the guy who's going to be Prime Minister. I know him. I appreciate the values that he's showing me. I understand what he's trying to do. Now, I'd say that Keir's made progress on that, but he's got further to go. And then they've got to know the policy. The policies you're going to put forward in government, and they've got to know a bit about the team as well. So that's what I'd say. And I'd say you, as the leader and the Prime Minister, probably shouldn't be giving too much of your time to thinking about how you manage the press. You'll get the press into a better place if you are successfully answering that question between now and then. That's what I'd say.
And just, you set out 4 things there. Attack the Tories, define yourself, clarify policy, introduce the team. I expect that of those 4, Keir Starmer would be pretty good at 3 of those. The really hard one is the second one, the definition of yourself. How do you do that?
It's funny, I thought you were going to say the hardest one would be policy. I don't think it is that hard. I mean, I think he's doing it. He hasn't got Obama's oratorical skills. He's not got Tony's kind of whatever it was that Tony had. He hasn't got Johnson's. I've never understood the appeal of Johnson, but he's clearly got something. And Keir kind of...
Funny.
Is it funny? Is that what it is? Yeah. Why didn't we get Tommy Cooper? Why was Tommy Cooper never Prime Minister? I'd have voted for Tommy Cooper ahead of Boris Johnson.
Had he run?
Billy Connolly any day of the week. So I think that Keir's... It's got to be authentic. If I were him, I'd own this boring thing. You know? I actually don't think he is boring. I think he's quite an interesting guy.
Just talk us through owning boring.
They keep trying to say that he's boring, right? Well, was Angela Merkel boring? Is Olaf Scholz boring? Or are they just actually quite competent people who are really good at what they're doing because they believe in, they know who they are and they believe in it and they're doing it? If you want a comedian, get Billy Connolly.
I mean, a proper comedian, you mean?
Get somebody who's really funny, not this, And I do the whole kind of celebrity thing as well. We've tried the celebrity route, right? These are really serious times with these serious people. I'm a serious guy. If you want somebody to tell you jokes, go and get somebody else. I'll work out for you what the challenges that could face in the country and policies to help us meet them. So I think he can own that more. I'll tell you something that's really interesting, though. I know Keir well. He's my MP, and I've known him for years. And I'll tell you something in politics that people underestimate the importance of. It's the same in any walk of life, really. But I think in the last few weeks he's found confidence. I think he's got a belief that he can win, which I don't think he's had up till now. And I think it's because you've got a sense of, this is what I mean about the never-ending conversation. You do get tipping point moments. And Johnson's probably sitting wherever he's sitting at the moment at somebody else's expense, sort of, doing whatever he does. He will be sitting there thinking, she's going to fuck up so badly, I can come back, right? If he is thinking that, he completely underestimates the extent to which he is a big part of what is now happening to her. Yeah. Because this is a continuum that's gone on. And I think what you've seen, this goes back to the kind of own the boring thing. Keir's come in as leader of the Labour Party. People are going a bit, what's he done before? The DPP? He's not been a politician very long, But he's come in and then he sort of set out, he did something actually quite extraordinary. I don't think this got the attention it really deserved. To go from where Labour were not long ago, where if you went to the Labour Party conference, you just basically saw loads of people waving Palestinian flags and there was a big row about anti-Semitism, right? To a place where they're singing the national anthem and starting the conference with a tribute to the Queen. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking the Labour Party's changed again, right? So he's done that. And then the second thing he tried to do is show that Johnson was unfit for office. Well, that's happened. And then the most important bit then follows. And I think he's done it in this sort of steady, calm, keep going, don't get pushed around by the people. So I think he's, well, here, let me throw it out. Hands up who's got a better, whatever you think of him or thought of him, hands up who can see that there has been an improvement in Keir Starmer's standing. That's a big question. That's a big thing.
Yeah. Well, by the way, also, if you're not feeling slightly confident when you're 33 points ahead in the polls.
Okay, right. But I tell you what, I'll tell him to think about that.
Yeah.
Just don't even look at it.
Oh, don't look at the polls.
Don't even think about it. Don't even think about it. Get up every day thinking you're going to lose.
Really?
Oh, definitely.
So
thinking about the things that you could do that would help you lose.
So I want to come back at the end, Alastair, to the point you made about how does the media behave differently? How does it think and ask different questions? And I mentioned, that Catlin wanted to go to Birmingham to go to the Conservative Party conference. As you know, because you were kind enough to kind of draw attention to it, we tried to ask the Conservative Party in the summer who were the members of the Conservative Party. Mm-hmm. And were the people who said they were members. And the party wouldn't answer those questions. And we thought that was a bit weird. So we then registered our pet tortoise, Archie, to be a member of the Conservative Party. And we registered Margaret Thatcher to be a member of the Conservative Party. And we registered a few foreign nationals. Mm-hmm. And we said, this is quite bad, isn't it? Because you've taken our money, you've given us a membership number, you've invited us to the hustings. I don't mean us. But
who did Archie vote for in the leadership election?
Spoiled her ballot. Actually, to be fair, she didn't. To be fair, she didn't get. I say she, Archie, because
Archie,
the truth is, we don't know the gender. We're still trying to figure out.
Well, the tortoise.
Tortoise, we don't know.
But Archie's, quite hard. Isn't Archie a male?
Male name, but we had Agatha was the previous tortoise, turned out to be a bloke. So it's just it's more complicated than you think. Right. Anyway, the point is that this is not the issue that we're campaigning on, though it's a big one. The point is that we went back to the Conservative Party and we said, look, I think it's reasonable for people to know who the electorate is, right? Particularly given the powers of the Prime Minister. And we also think it's quite important, given everything that's happened in the US and Russia, to know that the party actually checks who those people are, right? And I thought, my God, this is just a massive story. It's the extent to which our democracy really works. God love you, you said, this is quite a story. A couple of other people, The Guardian nodded to it in a leader, but mostly people didn't cover it. And then I followed you and sort of listened to you sometimes just tearing your hair out thinking, why does nobody ask a Brexit question? Why is that just... And I just wondered whether for everyone here, and for me too, trying to understand how certain things just disappear off the news agenda and how you can't get those questions asked, and whether or not you think that that's just the way in which the sort of the pack of the press works and always will work, or whether or not the changing media environment suggests that we are going to get questions asked, and a variety of different questions, and that's set to change.
I mean, see, it used to be that, you know, when I was working in the Mirror and doing the midnight shift, and you'd always waiting for the other papers to come in and see whether they had anything you didn't have, and then whether it was worth following up for the next later editions and the next day, etc. And I get the feeling that happens very rarely now. Partly because if newspapers do get decent stories, they're pumping them out on the media anyway. They're giving them to the telly and the radio and putting them online, and because they're trying to promote themselves. And I think that, I mean, I think that the atomization of the landscape means that you don't really get that same kind of impact with the story. It's very rare now that you get big impact. And this goes back to my point about the politicians. When you look at your phone, right, and you've got your news alerts coming in, whether it's from The Guardian, the BBC, the New York Times, whoever, they're very rarely these days about revelations that newspapers have dug up. They're about stuff that the politicians are doing and saying. The politicians have got way more power, I think, sometimes than they realise to set and frame the agenda. So I would say that that's been, for me, the big change. I'll tell you something very, very interesting, that Arsene Wenger, very clever guy, and I talked to him for a book I wrote about winning mindsets, and he said this thing which was, I thought it was really clever. He said, we've gone from a vertical world to a horizontal world. In the vertical world, leaders are up here and they could lead, and their decisions would percolate down through the system. In the horizontal world, the leaders are leading, but they're surrounded by this noise that's being created by other people all the time. And he said, it creates massive stress for the person around whom that noise. And the only way you can deal with it is actually to ignore it. And, you know, it's a lot easier maybe in sport than it is in politics, but he's not far off. He's not wrong. So
in that, let me ask you one final thing. When we set up Tortoise, actually, in many ways, the godfather of it for us, the kind of patron saint of it for us, was Harry Evans, right? The great Sunday Times editor, an editor who seemed to believe in a campaigning journalism, a challenging journalism. And I wanted to end by asking really whether or not you think that version of the Fourth Estate, that version of a press that holds power to account, actually still exists. And I wanted to put it in certain words because at Harry's memorial service, Simon Sharma spoke, and he talked about what it is to live in, this is Simon's phrase, scoundrel times. And in this, if you've got this, there's a little Tortoise Quarterly on news, and we use Simon's speech, and he says he hopes for another generation of journalists, uncompromising in their passion for the truth, a thorn in the side of corporate convenience, citizen writers whose moral and intellectual battery never dies. Is that just a nostalgic myth now? Do you think that world of journalism still exists?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I loved Harry Evans. I thought he was a wonderful guy and a fantastic journalist. And in fact, the last conversation I ever had with him was about how much he despised the way that our media was covering the Johnson government. He felt that, and you know, your point about stuff that is deemed not to be newsworthy. I mean, Brexit does my head in for obvious reasons. It's coming back, by the way.
It is coming back.
It's coming back, and you know, I think that debate, because the public are going to demand it. The public, whether you remain, the cabbie who brought me here tonight was going on about it, saying, you know, that what good has it done anybody? How can, you know, so that's going to come back. But then if you take, you know, there are so many I mean, I probably... Do you think I say it too often on the podcast? If this was a Labour government, I do say if this is a Labour government, they'd be tearing it to shreds. But it's true, and that's because they have. I go back to one of the main points I tried to make tonight. They are players every bit as much as spectators. Now, there used to be the owners would play, but the papers would at least have some kind of separation between the political and ideological view and what they were telling their readers. But I don't think that's overly romantic, because I think new stuff is emerging and will emerge. And I think eventually, look, I'm like you, I'm an old sort of newspaper guy. I don't want newspapers to die, but I think the newspapers are in danger of killing themselves. And it's not because of the technology. That's the stuff they like to blame. It's because of their role in the debasing of their own standards. So I think you will find that new stuff will spring up. And I think what will be, because of the way the world works these days, I mean, I just think they'll get overtaken way quicker than they think.
Do you think, this is, I promise you, it's the last question. Philip Gould was a great friend of yours and a sort of inspirational figure, great strategist of Tony Blair and the New Labour project. I remember him once telling me that the party that wins the election is the party that gives people the best vision of the future, the one that has the most convincing and inspiring vision of the future. Just listening to you, I was just struck by the fact that we're in such an odd place. It's so kind of extraordinary, the screw up that we're living through. And it's so profound, it's going to be so expensive. And yet here you are, you're doing this new podcast, it's going absolutely gangbusters. Do you think that you're commenting on a country in decline, or do you feel as though actually there is something, that there's a kind of magic door we can open to something else?
Both. Both of those things. And I think that the first one I feel because that feels to me like a reality. But the second one, because I just think there's enough energy in people to, once they realise that they do have power to change things, to change them. I'm actually writing a book at the moment, which is going to be called But What Can I Do? Because I think that is the barrier at the moment for most people is, yeah, well, that's all very well, but what can I do? Well, the truth is, you do whatever you can do within the confines of what you believe and how you think you can make change happen. And so I guess I can't believe we can go on like this much longer. I think if we do, we really are fucked. and listen, and countries do go through history. Countries do choose decline.
Yeah,
it's happened before, and we, I said earlier about I don't think they've learned anything about Johnson. To have had the week that they've had, the Tories, and do the damage they've done to the economy, and that watching that conference speech and telling each other how wonderful they all were.
Exactly.
My dynamic Chancellor, my brilliant Home Secretary, Andy Street, who's a human dynamo transforming Birmingham for the world. Hey,
Getting trams moving.
What planet are you on? Show some genuine understanding of the world you're actually in, as opposed to this kind of British exceptionalist fantasy. So, and I think they're misreading. I think they're misreading the public, both in the red wall phrase I loathe because it sort of suggests this homogenous. They're all Brexiteers. They all just care about patriotism. There are people in Burnley and Accrington and Halifax every bit as complicated as people in Tower Hamlets, which is one of the poorest parts of the country, right? So they do these homogenised views of Britain, and I think they're in real danger of losing both in the south and in the north because the people have seen through them. We've had 12 years of it.
Well,
sorry, I moved off the press.
No. I'm only pausing because just to let you know, I ran into Alastair a few months ago coming out of the Hampstead Lido, and I started asking the question.
Lido.
Is it Lido? I'm
the Lido
Is
guy.
it Lido?
I'm Lido.
Is it?
I'm very...
Okay, well, we're just going to do that again. I came out Lido.
Who says Lido?
Anyone for a Lido?
Lido.
Okay, you can all
and it's
go.
a win for Lido.
Anyway, I came out of it. It was a swimming pool, cold, open air. Came out of that thing, and I bumped into Alastair, and I started asking him a question because I was like, "Oh, I'm so excited to see him and ask him a question." And then I asked him another question, and then I was like, "That was interesting." And then I asked him another question, and you can see where this is going. And he's standing there, freezing. Obviously, just getting colder and colder. I felt increasingly, I haven't really apologised. I felt increasingly like, maybe I should just stop asking questions and let him go. So now I've done to you what I've done to him. I'm sorry that I ran over for a few minutes, but I hope you'll understand that listening to Alastair is a pleasure and makes you think about things more deeply and see things more clearly. And so I hope it's been worth sticking around for Tortoise Lates. Thank you all for coming, but in a big, big, heartfelt way, please thank Alastair Campbell.
Thank you. Thank you.